The colony sky was pale silver that morning, a thin sun struggling through the high clouds. A soft wind blew across the open yard of the Ilera Human Medical Station, carrying the scent of metal, dust, and faint traces of disinfectant. Soraya stood by the entrance, watching the human soldiers march past on their patrol route. Her tall Illyrian frame stood out among the shorter, broader humans. Her deep, violet eyes followed them with quiet suspicion. She had never worked so close to humans before. She had seen them in the streets, in the marketplaces, sometimes passing through the halls of government buildings back on her homeworld. But here on this remote colony at the edge of human and Illyrian space, she had to share her workspace with them, and that was a problem. Since childhood, Soraya had been told certain things about humans. They were fast to anger, quick to act without thinking, and dangerous to trust. She had been warned most strongly about one thing in particular: ever form a bond too close to them. Human biology, she had been told, was unstable compared to Illyrian physiology. If an Illyrian bore a child with a human, that child would be unpredictable in growth, appearance, and health. Her mother's words had been sharp and clear. Such children will not have a place in either world, Soraya had believed. Her mother, she still did. Or at least, she thought she did. She pulled her long coat tighter around her shoulders and turned back toward the station door. Inside, the air was warmer, carrying the low hum of medical machines. She stepped into the corridor, just as a group of human soldiers came out of the supply room carrying crates of bandages and portable medkits. They were laughing about something, their voices carrying in the narrow hallway. And then he said, "If you marry an Elaren, you'll have kids with 4 arms." One soldier joked, and the others burst into loud laughter. Soraya's stomach tightened. She kept her eyes forward and walked past them without speaking, her steps quick. But the words still reminded her of everything she disliked about human ideas of hybrid children. To humans, it was a subject for humor. To her people, it was a warning. The head medic, an older Eleron named Raylith, called out to her from the main ward. "Soraya, report to the storage bay. We're expecting new supply cases from the human transport. You'll need to verify the inventory." She nodded and moved toward the bay. When she arrived, she found a human soldier already there, checking the serial numbers on the crates. He looked up at her approach, and his brown eyes met hers with calm focus. "You must be Soraya," he said. "Lieutenant Marcus Hale. Logistics says we'll be working together on supply handling." Soraya hesitated. "I was told I would be verifying the crates." "You will?" he replied, his voice even, without a trace of mockery. "Aye. But you'll need my access codes to unlock them. I handle human military shipments." She didn't like the idea of needing a human's help, but she also wasn't going to argue over something as simple as supplies. "Very well," she said, stepping closer. They worked in silence for several minutes. Marcus keyed in codes, and Soraya scanned the contents against the inventory list. She noticed he moved with a kind of quiet efficiency, no wasted motion, no loud chatter. Most human soldiers she'd met seemed to fill every moment with noise. But Marcus was different. When the last crate was opened and checked, Marcus closed the manifest on his datapad. "That's all for now. I'll be stationed here for the next few weeks, so I guess we'll see each other often." Soraya only gave a short nod before turning away. She didn't want to admit that his calm manner had made her feel less guarded than usual. The days passed without much change. Soraya kept her distance from the human troops, speaking to them only when duty required it. But Marcus seemed to have a habit of appearing in her workspaces, sometimes in the supply bay, sometimes in the main ward, sometimes helping move injured soldiers from the landing pad to the triage room. One late afternoon, as Soraya was updating patient records, she overheard Marcus talking with one of the other human medics. They were discussing the condition of a half-human, a Illyrian child living in another colony. "She's doing fine," Marcus was saying. "Stronger than most kids her age, actually. And she's the happiest kid I've ever met." Soraya froze. At her desk, she didn't want to listen, but the words drew her in. She heard the other medic ask, "You're talking about your niece, right?" Yeah, Marcus replied. Her mom was Illyrian. My sister married her. People had doubts at first, but now she's just family. That's all that matters. Soraya forced herself to turn her attention back to the screen in front of her. She didn't know what to make of that conversation. 2 days later, everything changed. It was morning, and the colony's main sirens screamed across the settlement. The walls of the medical station vibrated with the distant thump of explosions. Ralith shouted orders as injured soldiers and civilians poured in through the front doors. Soraya rushed from patient to patient, using her medical scanner in her hands to treat burns, seal bleeding wounds, and stabilize broken bones. Suddenly, a deafening crash shook the building. A section of the ceiling near the storage bay groaned and cracked. Soraya was moving toward the noise when a beam of metal fell from above. She froze for a fraction of a second too long. Strong arms slammed into her from the side. Shoving her clear of the falling debris, she hit the floor hard, the air knocked from her lungs. She looked up to see Marcus crouched beside her, dust covering his uniform. Behind him, the metal beam lay across the floor where she had been standing. You all right? He asked, his voice urgent. She sat up slowly, still catching her breath. Yes. Good, he said, already moving to check if anyone else had been caught in the collapse. For the rest of the day, the battle outside raged. The station worked at full capacity, human and Illyrian medics side by side. Soraya caught glimpses of Marcus several times carrying wounded soldiers in on his back, shielding a group of children as they were evacuated from a damaged sector. Lifting rubble with raw strength when the machines were too slow, by nightfall, the enemy attack had pulled back, leaving the colony scarred but standing. The medical station was quiet again, though the air still smelled of smoke and burned metal. Soraya sat at a desk in the dim light, finishing her last patient report. She kept thinking about that moment in the storage bay collapse. Marcus hadn't hesitated. He had risked himself to push her clear. She remembered the look in his eyes, focused but not calculating. He hadn't saved her because she was useful to the mission. He had saved her because it was simply the right thing to do. That thought stayed with her as she left the station and stepped into the cool night air. The colony was still under alert, but the streets were quiet for now. Above, the pale silver sky of morning had deepened into a dark expanse filled with stars. Soraya looked up at them and felt the weight of her mother's old warnings pressing against something new in her mind. For the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she didn't know the whole truth about humans. And for the first time, she thought about Lieutenant Marcus Hale. Not as a human soldier, but simply as Marcus. The day after the attack, the colony's atmosphere was heavy with exhaustion. Smoke still rose from the outer sectors, and the faint smell of burnt metal drifted through the air. Repair crews were working in the streets, patching walls and replacing damaged power lines. Inside the medical station, the wounded were still being treated. Many patients would need weeks to recover. Soraya moved from bed to bed, checking vitals and changing bandages. The night before had been a blur in her memory, shouts, flashing alarms, the sting of dust in her eyes. But one moment stood out clearly. Marcus shoving her out of harm's way. She found herself watching for him without meaning to. Every time the door opened, her gaze flicked toward it. When a human soldier stepped in, carrying supplies, she felt a small disappointment if it wasn't Marcus. She told herself it was only because she needed to thank him properly. By midday, she finally saw him. He was carrying a crate of water filters into the ward, his uniform still marked with dust and faint scorch lines from the battle. You survived the night, he said as he set the crate down near the storage alcove. So did you, she replied. She hesitated, then added, I owe you thanks for what? He asked, raising an eyebrow. For what? She said quietly. In the storage bay. The beam. We gave a half smile as if it wasn't worth mentioning. Anyone would have done it. That's not true, she said before she could stop herself. Her tone was sharper than she intended, and she quickly looked away. Many would have thought first before acting. He didn't argue. Instead, he picked up the empty supply crate he'd brought earlier and started toward the door. We're being sent out tomorrow, he said over his shoulder, Field rescue, I'll be your partner for the run. Thought you should know. Her head turned sharply. Field rescue? That's not my assignment. It is now. Orders came in this morning. Some of the injured can't be moved to the station, so we're going to them. He paused at the doorway. Better get some rest tonight. When he was gone, Soraya stood in the middle of the ward, frowning. She didn't like the idea of working in dangerous territory, alongside a human soldier she barely trusted. But the orders were clear. She would have to go. The next morning was cool and gray, with low clouds over the colony. Soraya stood near the vehicle bay, wearing her field medic coat and carrying a satchel of medical gear. Marcus arrived a moment later, slinging his rifle over one shoulder and giving her a nod. The rescue vehicle rumbled to life, and the driver, a human corporal, navigated them out of the colony gates. The road ahead was cracked and dusty, the landscape stretching into rolling hills and broken stone. They drove for nearly an hour before reaching the first waypoint. The damaged settlement was quiet except for the sound of wind through the open doorways. A group of wounded civilians sat in the shade of a partially collapsed wall. Marcus jumped down first, scanning the area with sharp eyes, while Soraya followed with her medical kit. The work began immediately. Soraya cleaned and sealed deep cuts, set broken bones, and checked for internal injuries. Marcus moved between the patients, bringing water, carrying the injured to shaded spots, and speaking in a calm, steady voice. She noticed how icily he talked to the Illyrian civilians, how he crouched to meet their eyes, how he spoke without rushing them, how he treated them as if there was no difference between them and humans. At one point, a small Illyrian boy tugged at Marcus's sleeve, offering him a broken toy starship. "It's for you," the boy said shyly. Marcus smiled, accepting it with care. "Thank you, pilot. I'll take good care of it."
Ow.
Soraya found herself
Ow.
watching that moment more closely than she wanted to admit. They moved on to 2 more locations
Ow.
before the sun began to sink toward the horizon. The day had been long and tense, but they had rescued nearly 20 people. On the way back, their driver received a sudden transmission. "Command says enemy scouts spotted ahead," the corporal said. "We'll have to detour through the canyon." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "That route's tighter. If they're tracking us, we'll have less room to move." The detour began. The canyon walls rose high on either side, casting deep shadows over the narrow road. Soraya felt her heartbeat quicken. She had never liked enclosed places, too many places for danger to hide. Halfway through the canyon, a sharp crack echoed from above. The driver cursed, jerking the wheel as a burst of gunfire sprayed the ground ahead. "Out," Marcus ordered, swinging his rifle into position. "Move to cover." Soraya scrambled behind a boulder as Marcus returned fire. The attackers were hidden on the canyon rim, forcing him to fire upward. One of the civilians they had rescued stumbled into the open, panic on his face. Without thinking, Marcus dashed out, grabbed the man by the arm, and hauled him behind cover. Bullets struck sparks against the stone near his feet. Soraya's hands shook as she pressed her back against the rock. She was no soldier, but when Marcus shouted, "Medic, over here," she moved toward him without hesitation. A human corporal lay on the ground, blood seeping from a wound in his shoulder. Soraya dropped to her knees, hands moving on instinct. She pulled out a sealant patch, pressing it firmly against the wound as the soldier groaned in pain. Marcus kept his position beside them, firing in short bursts. "We can't stay here," the driver yelled from behind another boulder. Marcus nodded. "On my signal, we move." He glanced at Soraya. "Stay right behind me." Her breath caught. "I can run on my own. Stay behind me." His voice left no room for argument. When the moment came, Marcus sprang from cover, firing at the attackers. Soraya followed close, dragging the injured soldier with the driver's help. Bullets hissed past them, but Marcus didn't slow until they reached the vehicle. They piled in, the engine roaring to life. The canyon walls blurred past as they sped toward the colony. Only when they were clear did Marcus finally lower his rifle. Back at the station, Soraya treated the corporal's wound fully, her hands steady now that the danger was gone. Marcus stood nearby, silent. When the treatment was done, she turned to him. You put yourself between me and the gunfire? You were carrying a patient, he said simply. My job was to make sure you got through. She hesitated. You could have been killed. So could you, he replied, as if that ended the matter. Later that night, as the station settled into quiet, Soraya sat alone in the supply bay. She turned over the events of the day in her mind, the way Marcus had shielded her, the way he had spoken to the boy in the settlement, the way he had moved without hesitation when danger came. Her mother's words still echoed in her memory. Never trust them, never get too close. But now something was changing. She didn't know if it was trust yet. But it was no longer only fear. The following morning was quiet. It was the kind of quiet that felt too thin, like a sheet stretched over something sharp. The air above the colony still carried the smell of dust from the canyon skirmish. Repairs had begun on the outer walls, and soldiers moved through the streets with their rifles slung low, scanning for threats. Soraya barely slept the night before. She had replayed the events in the canyon over and over, Marcus stepping into the open to draw enemy fire, Marcus telling her to stay behind him, Marcus's steady voice, even under attack. She told herself she was only thinking about it because of the danger, because she needed to understand what had happened. But deep down she knew that wasn't the whole truth. Her shift began early. She checked on the injured corporal first. He was recovering well thanks to her work and the quick evacuation. Afterward, she helped Relith tend to the rest of the patients. But the station felt different now. Every time Marcus passed through, she noticed. He had a way of moving alert, but without the restless fidgeting most soldiers had by midday. She found herself at the vehicle bay again. Marcus was there, checking the locking clamps on a transport. You're going out again? She asked. He glanced up. Not yet. Command wants me on escort duty for a supply run later. But right now I'm supposed to rest. She raised an eyebrow. This is what you call resting. Small smile tugged at his mouth. Better than sitting still. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then a voice crackled over the bay's intercom. Medical response team to Sector 5. Repeat, medical. Response to Sector 5, possible enemy contact. Marcus's expression changed instantly, calm focus locking into place. That's us. Soraya felt her stomach tighten. Where? An abandoned mining tunnel, east of the colony. A survey team was ambushed. Some are trapped inside. The transport was loaded within minutes.
Ow.
Marcus took the driver's seat while Soraya checked her gear. The road to the old mine was rough, full of sharp turns and loose rock. The hills around them grew taller, their shadows stretching over the path. When they arrived, two frightened miners waved them down. They're inside. Half the team is pinned near the lower shaft, one said. We heard shots. We ran. Marcus grabbed his rifle. Stay here, he told them. Then he turned to Soraya. It's going to be dark in there. Stay close. Watch your step. The tunnel swallowed them almost immediately. The air was cooler inside, damp with the smell of stone and rust. Their flashlights cut narrow beams through the darkness. They moved deeper, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the walls. Soon they heard faint voices ahead, shouts mixed with the dull thud of shifting rock. Marcus signaled for silence. He crouched, listening. Soraya did the same, though her heart was beating fast. Two human surveyors were crouched behind an overturned cart, their faces pale. The rest are trapped past that section, one whispered, pointing toward a collapsed passage. We think the enemy is in the tunnels too. Marcus's jaw tightened. Soraya stared on their injuries. I'll check the path forward. She nodded and began scanning the surveyors. One had a twisted ankle. The other was bleeding from a cut along his temple. As she worked, she heard Marcus moving ahead, his boots quiet against the stone. Then came the sound of footsteps, more than one set, moving in the dark ahead. Marcus's voice rang low and sharp. Get down, Soraya threw herself behind the cart just as gunfire erupted in the tunnel. Missile flashes lit the stone walls in bursts of orange. The noise was deafening. Marcus returned fire, moving with precision, never wasting a shot. But the space was tight, and the attackers had cover among the fallen rocks. Soraya's hands shook, but she kept working, finishing the bandage on the surveyor's head. A sharp shout from Marcus cut through the gunfire. "Saraja, go! Take them back!" She hesitated. "Not without you." "Go," he barked, shifting his fire to cover their retreat, but she didn't move. The space between them was only a few meters. She saw one of the attackers raise his weapon toward Marcus's side. Without thinking, she grabbed a loose piece of metal from the ground and hurled it. It clattered against the wall, drawing the attacker's attention just long enough for Marcus to hit him with a clean shot. When the last attacker fell, the tunnel was suddenly quiet again except for the sound of their breathing. Marcus looked at her. His voice was calmer now. "I told you to go and leave you to get shot." "No." She was surprised by the firmness in her own voice. He studied her for a moment, then nodded once. "All right, let's get the rest of them out." The trapped miners were just beyond the collapsed section. Working together, they cleared enough rubble for the survivors to crawl through. Soraya treated a broken arm, a deep gash across a leg, and several bruises. Marcus lifted the heavier rocks without complaint, his shoulders straining under the weight. By the time they made it back to the surface, the sun was low in the sky. The rescued miners were loaded into the transport, and they headed back to the colony. In the vehicle, the adrenaline finally began to fade. Soraya sat across from Marcus, watching him check his rifle. "You saved my life in there," he said without looking up. "You've already saved mine twice," she replied. "I think we're even now." A faint smile appeared on his face. "I don't keep score." She looked down at her hands. "I used to think humans acted without thinking, that you were reckless by nature, but maybe I was wrong. Maybe it's not recklessness. Maybe it's—" She searched for the right word. "Instinct?" he offered. She shook her head. "No choice. You choose to act, even when it's dangerous." For a moment, his eyes met hers in the dim light of the transport. "Sometimes you don't have time to weigh every consequence. Sometimes you just know what's worth protecting." The rest of the ride was quiet, but her thoughts were loud. She realized her fear of humans had always been built on warnings and distance, not on real experience. And now, after everything she had seen, those old fears didn't feel as solid anymore. When they returned to the colony, Marcus walked her to the medical station before heading back to the barracks. As he turned to go, he said, "Get some rest, Soraya. Something tells me we're going to need it." She stood in the doorway, watching him disappear into the shadows of the street. For the first time, she wondered what it would be like to know him not just as a soldier, but as a man. And that thought stayed with her long after she closed her eyes that night. The colony's sky was heavy with smoke again, but this time it wasn't from a stray fire or a skirmish. The enemy was returning, larger and more organized than before. Alarm sirens blared across the settlement, and the citizens scrambled to safety while soldiers readied their positions. Soraya stood near the station entrance, medical kit in hand, her eyes scanning the streets. The weight of what was coming pressed on her chest. She had treated injuries before, helped with evacuations, even faced enemy fire in the canyon. But this was different. This was the full attack and assault designed to break the colony. Marcus appeared at her side, rifle slung across his back. His expression was calm, but his eyes were sharp, taking in every detail of the streets ahead. "We'll be working together in the front lines," he said. "Stay close, keep your head, and follow my lead." She nodded, her hands tightening around her medical kit. "I will." The first explosion shook the ground as the enemy entered the outer sector. Dust and debris filled the air, making it hard to see. Soraya and Marcus moved forward, weaving through rubble to reach the first group of civilians trapped by a collapsed building. Soraya's training took over. She treated cuts and bruises while Marcus helped lift fallen beams and carried the heavier debris with ease. She watched him as he worked, how precise he was, how focused, how calm, even when danger seemed to be all around. Her old fears about humans, about their recklessness and volatility, began to feel hollow. He wasn't reckless. He was careful, calculated, and yet fearless when others needed protection. A child's cry pierced the chaos. Soraya looked up to see a small Illyrian boy stuck under a fallen shelf. She ran to him, assessing the situation. Marcus arrived moments later, lifting the heavier part of the debris to give her room to free the boy. "You okay?" he asked quickly. "Yes," she said, focusing on the child's injuries. "Just a few scratches and bruises." She smiled briefly at the boy. "You're very brave." He smiled back, wide-eyed, before Marcus gently helped him to his feet. Watching Marcus interact with the child, Soraya felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't just admiration. It was a growing recognition of trust, of respect. The battle continued. Enemy forces pushed deeper into the colony. Soraya and Marcus worked together to evacuate civilians from the more dangerous areas. At one point, they came across a group of hybrid children, half-human, helping carry supplies. Soraya froze for a moment, her mind recalling all the warnings she had grown up with. But she watched them work, strong, fearless, and smiling. Despite the chaos, they were alive. They were thriving. And they were not the fragile, dangerous beings her childhood teachings had made her fear. Marcus noticed her pause, thinking about something. He asked softly. Soraya shook her head, embarrassed. "It's just remembering some old warnings." They were very clear. "Warnings don't always match reality," he said gently. "Sometimes the truth is better than what we're told to fear." She looked at him, really looked for the first time outside the context of duty and fear. There was no arrogance, no recklessness, only care and focus. The fight moved toward the central plaza, where the main supply depot was located. Enemy forces were trying to seize it, and the soldiers had to hold their ground. Marcus and Soraya found themselves on the front line, directing civilians to safe areas, while keeping an eye on the advancing enemies. One of the attackers fired at a group of children, trying to carry water from a nearby reservoir. Without hesitation, Marcus stepped into the line of fire, using his body to shield them. Soraya reacted instantly, dragging the children to cover and treating minor injuries as bullets struck the ground near them. When the moment of danger passed, she looked at Marcus. "Why do you risk yourself so easily?" she asked, breathless. He glanced at her, the faintest smile on his lips. "Because life is worth protecting, no matter whose blood it carries." The words struck her in a way nothing else had. Her mother's. Warnings about human biology, about hybrid children, about danger and unpredictability, they didn't feel real anymore. Marcus was proof that humans could choose bravery, kindness, and protection over recklessness. The hybrid children were proof that life born of both species could be strong and whole. The final push came at dusk. Enemy forces had reached the walls of the central plaza, and the soldiers were stretched thin. Soraya moved from patient to patient, patching wounds, calming frightened civilians, and coordinating with other medics. Marcus fought beside her, carrying heavy debris, helping the injured, keeping the enemy at bay when necessary. At one point, an enemy soldier tried to ambush them from behind a barricade. Marcus reacted instantly, knocking the attacker back and firing a precise shot that ended the threat. Soraya's hand shook, not from fear, but from relief. He had saved them both, and he did it without hesitation. When the battle finally ended, the colony had sustained damage, but it had survived. The enemy had been pushed back, retreating into the hills. Soraya and Marcus stood together in the central plaza, breathing heavily, surveying the damage. Around them, Elorans and humans were already helping each other clear rubble, tend to the wounded, and rebuild what had been broken. Soraya felt something shift inside her. She had been afraid of humans, afraid of what life with them could mean, afraid of hybrid children. But standing there, watching Marcus help an injured child to safety, watching humans and Illyrans work side by side without hesitation, she realized her fear had no power here. The future she had been warned about, the one she had feared, wasn't something to dread. It was something to protect, something to nurture. Marcus turned to her, brushing dust from his uniform. "You did well today," he said simply. "You did too," she replied, meeting his gaze. There was a new respect in her eyes, tempered by admiration and something she hadn't fully understood yet. Trust, recognition, perhaps even a spark of something deeper. He smiled faintly, as if he understood. "We make a good team," she said softly. "We do." For the first time, she thought not of warnings or fear, but of what could be possible. Humans were not the threat she had imagined. They were capable of care, of bravery, of loyalty, and perhaps, one day, a life shared between their species might not be something to fear, but something to hope for. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the plaza in warm golden light. Soraya walked through the clearing, watching children play among the ruins. Soldiers laugh quietly as they work together, and civilians tend to each other's injuries. Marcus walked beside her, silent but present. She realized she no longer felt the tight fear that had always lived in her chest when humans were near. Instead, she felt a cautious hope, fragile but real. And deep in her heart, she knew that the bond forming between her and Marcus was no longer built on duty or fear. It was built on trust, respect, and a shared understanding that courage and care were not bound by species. For the first time in her life, she imagined a future where the warnings she had grown up with didn't dictate her choices of future, where a human and an Illyrian could stand side by side, protect life together, and perhaps one day bring a new life into the world without fear. The morning after the battle, the colony was quiet in a way that felt almost unreal. Smoke still lingered over parts of the settlement, but most of the enemy forces had retreated into the hills. The citizens moved cautiously through the streets, helping each other clear rubble, tend to the wounded, and rebuild what had been damaged. Soraya walked beside Marcus, her medical kit slung over her shoulder, her eyes scanning the streets. They had spent the night helping wherever they were needed, and now the sun cast warm light over the plaza. She had never seen the colony so alive. With cooperation, humans and Illyrians moved together seamlessly, sharing tools, helping each other lift debris, and comforting frightened children. The tension that had always separated their species seemed to have melted. If only for a moment, Soraya stopped for a moment, watching a small group of hybrid children carry water from a makeshift fountain. They laughed together, Illyrian features and human features blending in the same faces, strong and full of life. For the first time, she felt no fear. She remembered the warnings of her childhood about hybrid children being fragile, unpredictable, and dangerous. Now, seeing these children thrive, she realized how wrong those warnings had been. Life could adapt. Life could thrive, even in forms. She had been taught to fear. Marcus noticed her pause. "Thinking again?" he asked, tilting his head with a small smile. "Yes," she replied softly. "About everything," she gestured, toward the children. "I used to fear what they might be, what might happen if humans and Illyrians had children together. But now, I see the truth." "The truth," he repeated, his eyes following her. "Gaze. They are strong," she said simply. "Alive, happy, and they belong here. All of them." Marcus nodded slowly. Then maybe the warnings weren't warnings at all. Maybe they were just fear, passed down from one generation to the next. Soraya looked at him, really looked, seeing not just a soldier, but a man who had chosen courage over caution, who had risked himself to protect others, and who had shown her the reality of humans, not the fear she had carried in her mind. The day was long, filled with repairs and aid. Soraya moved through the colony, patching cuts, cleaning wounds, and helping the exhausted rebuild their homes. Marcus worked beside her, carrying heavy debris, helping move injured civilians, and coordinating with other soldiers to fortify the settlement. At every step, she saw him act with patience, calm determination, and a quiet compassion that touched. Everyone around him, by afternoon, they reached the outer walls where the damage had been most severe. The walls were cracked and battered, but the colony's engineers were already repairing them. Marcus and Soraya helped where they could, lifting stones and setting beams. The air smelled of dust, sweat, and fresh paint. As they worked, Marcus glanced at her. "You've changed," he said quietly, almost to himself. She paused, wiping sweat from her brow. "Have I?" "Yes," he said with a faint smile. "When we first met, you kept your distance. You trusted very little, but now," his eyes softened. You're different. You see more than fear. You see possibility. Soraya felt warmth rise in her chest.
Ow.
It took seeing the truth,
Seeing life.
seeing people choose to protect each other, and seeing you. She paused, not sure if she should say more. Something in her heart pushed her to continue. You've taught me that humans are capable of more than I ever imagined. That we can be more than the warnings we were given. Yes. Looked at her, and for a moment, the noise of the rebuilding colony seemed to fade. He stepped closer, careful, as if the space between them mattered more than any distance in the battlefield. Then maybe we're not bound by the past. He said softly. Soraya's breath caught. Maybe we're not. They worked in silence for a few more minutes, side by side. Then, as the sun began to set, casting golden light over the colony, Marcus spoke again, There's something I've wanted to ask since the first day we met. Soraya looked at him, curious. Yes, he hesitated, then smiled. Faintly, would you consider being part of the future with me? It's not just surviving it, not just seeing it from the sidelines, but living it. Together. Her heart raced. She remembered all the fear she had carried for so long, the warnings, the stories of hybrid children, the distrust of humans. And now, standing beside him, seeing what humans and Illyrans could do together, she realized that fear had no place. Here, there was only trust, only possibility, only hope. She met his gaze steadily. Yes, she said, her voice calm, strong. I would. Marcus's smile widened. It was a smile of relief, of quiet joy, and of hope for what could come. Reached out, taking her hand gently in his. Then let's face it together, he said. The colony around them continued its work, oblivious to the quiet moment between the two of them. Children laughed and played among the rubble, soldiers coordinated repairs, and citizens shared what little they had. Soraya looked around, feeling a profound sense of belonging not just to the colony, but to the people within it, and to the future they were all building together. Over the following weeks, life began to settle into a new rhythm. Humans and Illyrans worked together more openly than ever, sharing duties, food, and knowledge. Soraya and Marcus were often together, not just in the field, but in quieter moments as well, checking on patients, walking through the settlement, and sometimes just sitting in silence, enjoying the calm after the storm. Soraya found herself laughing more than she had in years, watching the hybrid children play, hearing Marcus tell stories of his past, and feeling a connection to him that went beyond gratitude or duty. She thought about the warnings of her childhood, the fear, the mistrust, the caution about human children. And now, she understood that the warnings had been only one perspective. Life was bigger than fear. Life was about trust, courage, and way. The choices made to protect what mattered. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Marcus and Soraya walked along the outer wall of the colony. They watched the horizon, where the distant hills glowed in. The last light. I never thought I would see a future like this, Soraya said softly. Where humans and Illyrans can stand together, work together, even live together. Marcus squeezed her hand gently. And yet here we are, she smiled, feeling a warmth she had never known before. I used to fear what it would mean to have a child with a human, she admitted. I thought it would be dangerous, unpredictable, something I shouldn't want. But now I can't imagine fearing it. I can imagine a life where such a child could be strong, loved, and part of this world. I can imagine hope. Looked at her with gentle understanding. And maybe it's not just about survival anymore. It's about living. About choosing a future, together, without fear. Soraya nodded, her heart full. She had faced danger, seen courage, and learned to trust, not just in Marcus, but in life itself. The future she had feared was no longer a shadow. It was real. Bright and open to all who chose to step into it. As night fell, the colony settled into a peaceful rhythm. Fires burned in small braziers, lights flickered in the windows of rebuilt homes. The soft hum of conversation filled the air. Soraya and Marcus stood together on the wall for a while, silent, watching the life they had helped preserve. Finally, Marcus turned to her, his eyes reflecting the starlight. Whatever comes next, we face it together. She met his gaze. Her violet eyes, steady and bright. Together, she agreed. And for the first time in her life, Soraya felt no fear about what the future might bring. She felt only hope, trust, and the quiet certainty that love and courage could bridge worlds. She had feared the idea of life with a human, feared what it could mean, feared the unknown. But now she knew. The unknown was not something to fear. It was something to embrace. Hand in hand, they watched the stars appear over the colony, the night calm and full of promise. The past was behind them, the battle was over, and the future stretched ahead, wide and bright. And together they were, ready to meet it. The colony was alive, the people were thriving, and Soraya realized that the life she had once feared was already here. It was beautiful.